We're now live.
Good morning. Welcome to this meeting of the Health and Wellbeing Board. My name is Councillor Lee Chapman. I am co-chairman of the board and I'm obliged to inform you that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded. Members of the public will be able to hear the audio of the meeting and view the papers shown on the screen. I'll now explain that this meeting is being held using remote technology, and should any committee members experience technical difficulties during the meeting, they should immediately contact the designated IT officer on the number they've already been supplied with. Everyone is requested to mute their microphones unless being asked to speak. Please only use the chat function to indicate the desire to speak. I know that colleagues from time to time share information. I think let's not forget that members of the public will benefit from some of that information being shared in the public forum. So if we could just use the chat function for indicating the desire to speak, that would be very helpful. And I'd also ask, and I'll remind you if necessary, to introduce yourselves as you are invited to speak, just so that the public are aware who it is who's speaking. As chair, I will interpret the council's existing standing orders in light of the requirements of remote participation, with advice from the monitoring officer prior to making a ruling. At the start of the meeting, I'll ask the members of the board to confirm their presence and any disclosable pecuniary interest they have in any items of the agenda. I will ask everyone that speaks during the meeting to introduce themselves. So I'll start off with myself. I'm the councillor for Church Stratton and Craven Arms, and I have no pecuniary interest to declare on the items on the agenda. Dean Carroll, please.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Dean Carroll, local member for the Battlefield Division and Cabinet member for Adult Social Care, Public Health and Climate Change. I'm present and I can confirm that I have no pecuniary interest in any item on the agenda.
Thank you. Ed Potter.
Hi, hello, Councillor Ed Potter, portfolio holder for Children's Services, and no interest to declare.
Thank you. Karen Bradshaw.
Hello, present, thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Lynn Corley.
I know Lynn was having difficulty joining, Lee, so
okay,
I think
we'll
Lee won't be
here.
Lynn is, I know she's going to be here, but I'm sure she'll say when she is.
Okay, and we've got David Evans.
Thanks, Chair. Present, nothing to declare, and apologies for being slightly late.
Okay, and apologies from Julie Davis. You're here, I'm assuming, David?
Yes.
Thank you. Jackie Jeffrey.
Hi, Chair. Yes, thank you. I'm here. I can confirm I'm present. I'm Jackie Jeffrey, Chief Officer of Citizens Advice Shropshire, representing the Voluntary Sector Assembly. And I do have a pecuniary interest in that I hold a contract under the Better Care Fund.
Thank you, Jackie. You're very welcome. Tanya Miles.
Good morning. I'm present. Nothing to declare. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Tanya. Julian Povey.
Julian Povey, I'm chair of the CCG. I've got no interest in the items, and I'm present.
Thank you, Julian. Rachel Robinson.
Thanks, Chair. I'm Rachel Robinson, Director of Public Health Shropshire, and I have no pecuniary interest to declare.
Thank you. Laura Fisher.
Morning, Chair. Laura Fisher, Housing Services Manager, Shropshire Council. No interest to declare.
Thank you. Nikki Jakes. Can't see Nikki. She'll let us know if she joins us. Thank you. I have had apologies from David Stout, Chief Exec of Shropcom. I understand Ross Preen is present and substituting. Could you confirm that, Ross, please?
Yes, that's correctly. Ross Preen, Director of Finance and Strategy for Shropcom, so representing David, and I've got no pecuniary interest to declare.
Thank you, Ros. You're very welcome. Thank you for substituting. And I've had apologies from Louise Barnett from SAF, and I understand Chris Preston is present. Could you confirm that for us, Chris? Or not, as the case may be. So perhaps Chris can let us know when he joins us. Okay. Lovely. So I'll now turn to items on the agenda. So apologies for absence and substitutions. We've dealt with substitutions, and I've also received apologies from Mark Brandreth from RJAH. We've dealt with item 2 on the agenda, which is disclosable pecuniary interests. Item 3 on the agenda is the minutes. Unfortunately, for unforeseen circumstances, these are unavailable to present at this meeting. We'll get those organised for the next meeting. Item 4 on the agenda is public question time. And I'm pleased to say that we've received a public question from Sue Stewart. And the way that I'm going to deal with this is I will read Sue's question. I will also summarise the response that we've received to Sue's question, and I'll also undertake to make sure that the response is sent to Sue at the end of this meeting, and it will also form part of the record of the meeting in the minutes. So the question says, as a member of the Making It Real Committee for Shrewsbury, I am concerned about the cancellation of our last proposed meeting, the stepping down of the chair and the lack of information as to when the next meeting will be, and how electing a chair and possibly a co-chair will now be arranged. The attendees numbers have fallen dramatically last year, and there is confusion amongst those who do attend as to the purpose and achievements of the meeting is aiming to produce. As I understand, the various Making It Real committees feed it into the health and wellbeing agenda. Is that committee looking at these concerns and check that work is being undertaken to give those receiving council services a voice? So that's Sue's question. We've received a response to this question from Adult Social Care within the council, which addresses these concerns. I don't propose to read it out in full, but I will go through the question so that everyone is clear as to the response. So the organisation of the council's Making It Real board and groups has been significantly impacted by the COVID pandemic. And for most of the period, it has only been possible for members of these groups to come together virtually, meaning that physical meetings have been temporarily in abeyance, whilst the concerns of people spending time together in meetings have had to be carefully balanced with us wanting to be inclusive when people are unable to take part virtually. Our long-standing chair of Making It Real stood down in August 2020, and we sincerely thank him for his work and contributions for the Making It Real agenda over the years. And having worked with John myself, I'd personally like to add my note of thanks. The changes brought as a result of the COVID pandemic has given us the opportunity to review the structure, organisation and purpose of Making It Real. And we've come together with colleagues at Think Local, Act Personal to support us holding some pause and reflect sessions in the coming months. We will be contacting people shortly with more details of these sessions and how they can become involved. There is a link to the Making It Real page on Shropshire Council's website, and it includes details of the journeys of the board and the advisory groups. And over the past year, there's been considerable work done by our experts by experience. They've been involved in a new direct pay policy processes. They've worked on our carer support service. They've inputted to learning disability and autism service reviews. And we also held a peer review pause and reflect sessions in 2020, which were an opportunity for people to comment directly on adult social care services. I should just emphasise, making it real is just one of the ways in which adult social care facilitates the voice of people who are part of their services. We continue to be committed to involve the people who use our services in their design and delivery at every stage possible, and at the earliest stage, recognising the challenges of achieving this in an inclusive way as a result of the restrictions of the current pandemic. The Mental Health and Autism Partnership Boards continue to take place virtually at present. We very much look forward to a new and exciting phase of making it real in Shropshire. Thank you. That concludes the response, and as I said earlier, the full response will be forwarded to Sue and will be published on the council website along with the minutes of the meeting. Thank you, and thank you for sending us in a question to the Health and Wellbeing Board. We welcome questions and interest from the public, very much part of the work that we do and our ability to respond to concerns directly. Item 5 then is the system update, and the reports range across a number of areas. The first report is an update from the STP, and I have Jill Robinson down to present that, but I am uncertain as to whether she's present in the meeting. Jill, are you here to present the meeting, or is someone else taking this for us?
Chair, sorry, Nikki O'Connor was going to do it, but I don't think Nikki can speak, so I will probably do it if that's okay.
That is absolutely fine, David. Welcome your stepping in. If you could take us through the report, that would be great.
Thank you. So I'm going to assume that the report has been read, but I'll just try and pick up some of the headlines, if that's okay. Clearly, there's been a huge amount of work going on across the STP. As you can imagine, I'm not going to pick up all of the things around COVID, because obviously we're going to pick that up later on the agenda. But just to let everyone know, in regard to the system plan, we have submitted this week an application to become an integrated care system. That went in on Monday. My understanding is there is a regional panel next week and a national panel the week after, at which we'll get feedback on our application. All partners have contributed to that, I'm pleased to say, and it is genuinely a joined up partnership document across local authorities and all health partners as well. You will have seen that NHSEI launched a consultation following their board meeting in December around the future of integrated care systems. That was to look at two particular options. One was a statutory ICS board joint committee with an accountable officer. That would be mandatory rather than voluntary ICS board, and put some statutory obligations around an ICS, but not to the extent that probably some people expected. Option 2 is actually to create a statutory NHS body. So it would be repurposing CCGs, taking on commissioning functions of CCGs, and certainly taking into account the move towards the single strategic commissioner approach and strategic commissioning as part of that. It would mean that CCG governing bodies and GP membership model would be replaced by a board consisting of representatives from all system partners, and as a minimum that would include reps from NHS providers, primary care and local government, alongside an appointed chair, a chief executive and chief finance officer. There of course would be other board appointments in place. It also talks in the document about provider collaborations. I wasn't going to say much more than that, but happy to take questions around that. Winter planning obviously has been taking place, although I would say that clearly this year's winter plan is different from previous winter plans because of the impact of COVID-19, and we are seeing increases around activity associated with that at the moment. There is a section on COVID-19, but if you will allow me, Chair, I was going to leave that to talk about until later on in the agenda, given that we know that we're going to pick that up as an agenda item. Just in terms of overall pressures in the system currently, though, whilst overall activity has remained lower across the two emergency departments, that's much more around the Princess Royal site than the Royal Shrewsbury site. We are nonetheless still struggling around A&E performance, although minors are achieving 95%, majors are not achieving 95% currently, and that's still mainly down to senior decision-making staffing not being available because of the workforce challenges that the trust have, but that continues to be worked on. We've not seen much incidence in flu in relation to this winter, but we've put a lot of effort into the flu campaign, working with public health colleagues to try and make sure that as many people were vaccinated before the start of the COVID vaccination. But again, I'll pick up the COVID vaccination later on in the agenda, when I think Rachel and I are going to do a little bit of a double act.
Thank you, David. So I'm just looking, before I step in with my question, on whether there was any members of the committee who wanted to ask questions of Dave on his report. I've got a quick one, Dave. I noticed the two options that are set out in the paper, and clearly a final decision on that hasn't been made, but is there a difference between the two options in terms of the financial risk to the organisations that in effect contribute towards the funding of the provider side of commissioning?
No, I don't believe so, Lee. This will be about, and in a way, if you go with if the NHSEI go with option 2, which I think we probably think they will do, if I'm honest, I think that begins to make much clearer having one financial pot for the system that will then need to be allocated according to how the ICS board determines to do that. Now, I think in the short term, that's likely to be based around some kind of block contract, and we'll begin to move away from a tariff and PBR system, although clearly the board needs to make that decision in due course. But I think increasingly we'll start to see, through local determination, the start of place-based budgets in some shape or form. Now, whether that's done around individual pathways or whether that's done around a population basis, I think the system needs to have that discussion, but I don't think it places any more financial risk on us. Okay, great. That's helpful, and thank you, David, for that. So system update 2 is the Care Closer to Home update, and I've got a note. Yes, I've got a note that this particular paper is not being presented. The paper is intended as an update. If there are further questions, then you can certainly address those to us. The recommendations are asked to review the scope of the programme board and the revised membership and chair arrangements. So 5.2 I will take as noted. Item 5.3 is the Better Care Fund, and I am anticipating my colleague Penny Basin to take this one for us. Penny?
Thank you, Chair. I am here.
Good.
Hello, everybody. So
yeah, apologies, the paper did come out rather late, so I should just go through it very quickly. With regard to, however, there isn't a huge update on this occasion, and we're looking for a bigger update to come to the next meeting. We had the long anticipated planning guidance for the Better Care Fund arrived in December for 2021. So I think that is obviously in relation to the fact that we have had a really difficult year with regard to COVID. Having said that, our Better Care Fund plan has been consistent this year, as we have had in the last number of years, feeding into our system strategic planning and our system joint working. We focused our Better Care Fund on prevention, just as a reminder to everyone, on prevention, so keeping people well, focusing on social prescribing, let's talk local, admission avoidance, so keeping people out of hospital and different ways to do that, and reducing the delayed transfers and focusing on system flow. So those are the key areas that we work on, and consistently we have done that this year. Of course, as we described in the September Health and Wellbeing Board, that has changed in some ways, particularly around COVID. So there was an urgent need through the first lockdown to keep people out of hospital. So we did that with additional funding coming through into the STP area to support COVID and reduce the number of people in hospital and be able to move people out very quickly. And that was agreed and discussed the last board meeting, out of the September, board meeting, where we agreed the Schedule 1 of the Better Care Fund Section 75 partnership agreement. We have, however, been able to continue much of our prevention work and in fact put in place different kinds of prevention work to support people in Shropshire to remain well through COVID. And we've been working really collectively as a system to do that. The most notable change around that recently is the WIPS contract. So that's the Wellbeing and Independence contract that we let under the Better Care Fund on an annual basis, or sorry, it's a 3-year contract, but it's part of the Better Care Fund. We've been able to uplift that contract this winter with a combination of winter pressure funding from the PCNs and funding from the local authority. It's been a real joint effort to do that, and the role of that contract is to focus on the clinically extremely vulnerable and also any vulnerable, to keep people well this winter and keep them out of hospital. So there's increased activity and increased coordination through that funding, and that's being delivered by Age UK, so that's really positive. As far as I'm concerned, particularly around the fact that we're doing that really jointly as a system. So the planning, just back now to the planning guidance. The planning guidance that came out in December, it wasn't guidance, sorry, I should say, it was more of a policy statement. So what it said was, importantly, that due to COVID, the plans would not be required to be submitted for assurance this year. However, the areas would need to make sure that we have our Section 75 agreement in place and that we meet the national conditions. And as a reminder, those national conditions are around having a Section 75 agreement, contribution to social care from the CCG, the spend on the CCG commissioned out of hospital services meets or exceeds the minimum ring-fenced amount, and the CCG and local authorities confirm compliance with the above conditions to the Health and Wellbeing Board. So that's that conversation with and agreement with the Health and Wellbeing Board. So we are also expecting sooner, I suppose, and it's being worked on currently, the guidance for 21-22. And so there'll be some significant work going on in the next couple of months to look through that guidance when it does come available. And I think finally to note that there will be, going forward, that the other funds associated with the Better Care Fund, the Improved Better Care Fund, winter pressures, have been agreed for next year as well, which is important, but it also remains a risk to this system, as it will do to other systems, that we continually are reliant on this grant funding in order to manage through winter and manage our system, that there hasn't been a confirmed spend rather than a year-on-year grant fund, which makes it difficult for us to plan as a system. And that's it from me, I think, unless anybody has any questions.
Thank you, Penny. I will check the list to see. any questions? No. I note that Lynn Crawley from Healthwatch has joined us at the meeting. Welcome, Lynn. And Iqbal Zafar from BMPFT has joined us. Thank you both in attendance. It's very helpful. In the absence of any other questions, Penny, I've got a question in terms of timing. So given that there isn't this round of BCF, the national assurance requirement or submission for approval, when are we anticipating that the Better Care Fund plan will be signed off by the Health and Wellbeing Board? Because that will still be a requirement, presumably, for us to formally agree next year's plan in this forum. Have we any indication of when we're going to do that? So
the joint expenditure has come to this board and been agreed by the board previously. So the minimum contribution to social care and the contribution to that pooled joint fund as we run it in this system has been agreed. That has been agreed, and that's been, you know, we've worked collectively as a system through the Joint Commissioning Board and collectively across our system planning to do that. The remainder of the funds will come to the next board for approval. Okay. Great stuff. That's helpful, Penny. Thank you for presenting the report. My understanding is that as a board, we're asked to note the report. So if everyone's happy with that, we'll proceed to the next item. Okay, so the next item is again part of item 5. And this section is around Healthy Lives update. I understand that my colleague Val Cross, our Health and Wellbeing Officer from Shropshire Council, is going to provide us with an update. Over to you, Val.
Hi, Lee. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Val Cross. I'm the Health and Wellbeing Officer at Shropshire Council. I'm just going to give you an update on the stage 2 bid to the LGA Stroke Health Foundation. This is just the focus of the paper on this occasion. At the last meeting, I said that we're waiting the outcome of our bid, and I'm really pleased to say that we were successful in getting to stage 3. Our title of the project we're going to be starting is Addressing Food Insecurity for Families Living in South West Shropshire. And this stage 3 is what we call the discovery phase. And we were awarded a grant of £20,000 to start doing this work. I just want to say thanks to Emily in particular at the Shropshire Food Poverty Alliance for helping to write this this bid that got us through to stage 3. So now we're at stage 3, work's going to commence, and we've got a really great project group which includes representatives from Public Health, then we've got the Food Poverty Alliance, Healthwatch and Shropshire CAB. And we met to discuss and agree last week the project plan, governance structures, budget breakdowns, budget breakdown and the submission to the LGA to show how we're going to be spending this money. So on Monday just gone, I think it was, the day's merging into one a little at the moment, we met on Monday to plan the engagement process, and we're going to meet again next week. And we started looking at the types of questions that we need to ask, interviews, surveys, etc., and our public-facing information. And Healthwatch and Shropshire Food Poverty Alliance are our key partners with the engagement process because of their, their expertise around that. The LGA funding as well is targeted at supporting local authorities in dealing with a complex problem, which is in our case food insecurity, using a whole system approach. So what this is applying a complex system approach to the way in which we address this problem. And furthermore, we need to demonstrate that we're identifying and sharing the learning that emerges through the use of the whole system approach. And in my recommendations, I've said that key to the success of the work is this whole systems approach, i.e. that we're all working together for this common aim. And although the project group can do the doing, to find out how we can address food insecurity for families in South West Shropshire, all organisations on the board are asked to engage with this work when they're approached, because we know food insecurity has been heightened with the COVID-19 pandemic. And we know it's a reality in our community as well, and it's one of our priorities of the Health and Wellbeing Board. And just as an update really, although I've said in the risks section concerns about the timescale, we've since learnt from the LGA, who are very supportive when you do contact them. We have a potential 4 weeks, and they do recognise the challenges that particularly the third lockdown is creating in terms of engagement, which is a big part of what we're going to be doing. And so this has provided reassurance, and we're now going to forge ahead. So thank you everyone. I'm happy to take questions if needed.
Thank you, Val. That's very helpful. The moment. Okay, great. Yeah, so Chris Preston's joined us from SAF, so there's an update on that. I haven't seen any questions come in on the chat, so colleagues and members of the board, if you've got a question for any of the presenters, if you could jot that into the chat function, then I can pick that up there and give you the opportunity to ask your question. Thank you, Val, for that. It's very exciting that we got the funding. Particularly pleased about that. I think I put my name down on the form for that, so I'm pleased that we got the support, and pleased that it's a cross-system, whole system approach, because it's certainly an area that we need to be really looking into and focusing on. I know the recent government proposals looking at preventing supermarkets from doing buy one get one free on unhealthy foods, for example, has prompted a couple of items and emails into my post bag and into the MP's post bag. So there is certainly interest out there around how we make healthy food affordable and the impact of government policies on that. So that is a useful update. Val, thank you very much for that. So our next item on the agenda, having come to the end of the system update, is the Joint Strategic Needs Assessment update. And I know that my colleague Rachel is present in the meeting. If you could introduce yourself, Rachel, and talk us through the paper, please. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm Rachel Robinson, Director of Public Health for Shropshire. I'm going to assume that everybody's read the paper on the GSNA, but I'm just going to pull out a few points. So the paper itself is just an update on where we are with the GSNA progress since we last discussed this at the board, which was 12 months ago, and some revised timescales, taking into account obviously COVID and the impact that that has had, and also additional resources that we will be bringing in. So everybody will know that we are due to update the GSNA every 3 years. Our last formal update was in 2012. Obviously, work has happened in the interim on specific needs assessments, but we agreed as a board that it was urgent to update the needs assessment and the joint strategic needs assessment, and that began last year. In terms of where we were with the needs assessment, that it's important that the GSNA not only informs the development of the health and wellbeing strategy, but links to the work around the population health management, which supports our STP, and as authorities supports our own programmes of work. So for the council, that would include the community and rural strategy, and that these come together, and the GSNA is part of the underpinning work that supports that and evidence base. As colleagues will remember, we agreed back last year that we'd have a 3-phased approach to our update. The first phase and second phase would run in parallel. So the first phase was to look at outstanding needs assessments. We agreed that that was the MSK, the older people's and the SEND needs assessments. In terms of progress, we have the older people and MSK work was completed. The SEND work was begun, but was paused during COVID. And the report outlines the plan that we have to get that finished by March. That's obviously a priority and will be picked up within the SEND paper. And we've put an additional resource in to support the delivery of that. The second area of work was the prioritisation work, which we undertook as a board last year and is attached in Appendix 2. That will need to be refreshed with COVID and additional information, but that work has also taken place to begin to develop that prioritisation framework and inform the plans that I outlined earlier. The phase 3, which is the move to the place-based approach, is the work that has been partly paused because of COVID. That is, if you remember, for our place-based, when we talk place-based, we're talking local, smaller geographies, place plan areas at smaller communities and neighbourhoods and towns, rather than doing a whole Shropshire needs assessment. Within that, we would be looking at data, but also assets, services, and engaging with communities to understand the local place, the actions and priorities and recommendations that need to take place within those areas. Whilst formally that work has paused through COVID because of resources and diverting of resources, some work, it is important to say, has been undertaken through COVID. We have been mapping vulnerability, we have been mapping through our community reassurance teams and other teams assets and engaging with our communities throughout COVID. However, we do need to restart that work, and we've proposed a formal timetable of refresh, which I'd like to bring to the board. That timetable is, as I said, to complete the SEND needs assessment by spring and to restart in April, taking into account the impact of COVID, bringing in additional business intelligence support, also a joint population health management post, which will be joint with the CCG, and additional analytical capacity, as well as the engagement teams that are so important with our, not only internally within the council, but we must remember this is a joint needs assessment, and so therefore engagement teams across our partners and also very importantly with our communities, voluntary sector and members. So that is the proposed timescale that I've laid out, and I just welcome any comments and feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. I'll give colleagues a chance to post a note on the system if they've got a question to ask. And the first of those, if I could ask Iqbal Zafir, like to come in and introduce yourself, Iqbal.
Hi, I'm Dr. Zafir Iqbal. I'm a medical director. I'm an associate medical director at MPFT. Just to say, I mean, I think this is really welcome, and it'll help with the STP planning and system-wide our population health management approach on a whole range of issues. So it's kind of really welcome, and it's quite an ambitious program of work over the next sort of year or two. One of the pieces of work that the system will need to do is to, as part of the mental health transformation work, I think there's an expectation there'll be further data analysis and an equity audit, and I'm just wondering whether that's a standalone piece of work or maybe it could be linked in with this program.
Do you want to respond to that,
Yeah,
Rachel, and then I'll take on the other contributors after that?
No, absolutely. So we had undertaken a mental health needs assessment relatively recently, but that does need to be updated. So I think the answer is probably both to that question. There will need to be a refresh, as you say, in terms of the data and information. But what I would say is the mental health being embedded across all of the needs assessments that we're doing as well. It's obviously a really important theme, and we need to be picking up, a range of indicators around mental health and well-being that need to be fed in. So a bit of a both, I would suggest.
Thank you, Rachel. Karen Bradshaw wanted to speak.
Thank you, Chair. Karen Bradshaw, Director of Children's Services for Shropshire. More of a comment than a question, just to really endorse and support this, particularly the timescales in respect to the JSNA and the SEND agenda. This links clearly to the next item, and we are very clear that we do need to have a JSNA in place in respect of SEND. So the sooner we can get this work underway, the better for us all, I think. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. I haven't got any other requests to speak. I think from my own perspective, from the chair's perspective, and colleagues may be aware, I've also been called to Shropshire Council's Health and Adult Social Care Scrutiny Committee and faced questioning and challenge around the delays to the JSNA, so I'm very familiar with our need to progress this. I think what comes out to me from reading the paper is that this isn't just about Shropshire Council's public health function in order to deliver across what Dr. Zafar quite rightly pointed out was an ambitious timescale. And I think I really just wanted to rally colleagues across the system who are present in this meeting to say that you know, we're going to be recommending here as a Health and Wellbeing Board at item 2.1 to endorse the programme, and also to note the priorities and the proposed work programme. And I think to a lesser or greater extent, individually and as organisations, we're going to need to put all of the resources that we've got available to us and that are appropriate to get this sorted. I think it's also significant at 7, the interlinkages with other programmes of work. So there's five interlinkages with other programmes of work, and degrees, lesser or greater degrees of interdependence. So you know, I'm aware and welcome the new joint post for population health post sitting within the public health and CCG team. But given the impact that the pandemic had on our previous agreed programme, I would hope that we all support this ambitious paper. Do you want to come back at all on that, Rachel, before we go to the vote?
No, thank you. Just to support exactly what you've said and put much more eloquently than I have. But absolutely, this is really fundamental to everything that we need to do. It links into all those programmes, and it is joint. And whilst I do think it's right professionally that the leadership sits with public health, that this is absolutely joint, and it's not. This is not just about data; it's about engagement. It's about underpinning and all our areas of work. So it is really, I think, as Zafar rightly said, this is a huge commitment. It is a big undertaking, but it gets very different results to the usual kind of single needs assessments on themes that we may do. It's really about engaging and local action plans. So the benefits really will. It's a significant amount of work that we do need people to commit to and endorse and support, and the biggest benefit is when we do that jointly with all partners and it is the partners around the Health and Wellbeing Board. So just to support that. Thank you.
Dean Carroll would like to speak.
Thank you, Chairman. Two things really. Firstly,
sorry, Dean, could you just introduce yourself?
Yes, of course, Chairman. Sorry, Councillor Dean Carroll, portfolio holder for Adult Social Care, Public Health and Climate Change. Two things really. Firstly, to endorse what Rachel said. And secondly, to come back to something you said, Chair. Actually, you hit the nail on the head with a single word when you said that this is ambitious, given everything else that is going on in the world of health and social care at the moment. The timescales for delivery of this are very ambitious, and also what we're seeing is the priorities that we've identified through the matrix. I think we'll find that in some cases those have become even more of an issue over the course of COVID than perhaps we were expecting beforehand. Just a few days ago, I saw a report on declining mental health and increasing alcohol dependency among frontline health workers over the course of the pandemic, which is in reality probably not surprising given what they're being asked to go through at the moment, but is still very worrying and shows the importance of the JSNA locally in helping us to meet and address these needs. But I think you're right that it is very ambitious, and depending on the course of the pandemic, and how that goes over the next few months. Of course, we all hope that things will improve with the rollout of the vaccine, but depending on the course of that, it will require probably quite extraordinary willpower from all partners to make sure that we keep it on track.
Thank you, Dean. Lynn Corley from Healthwatch would like to speak. Lynn.
Hi, Lynn Corley, Chief Officer, Healthwatch Shropshire. I just wanted to say that I would really welcome a conversation with Public Health about how Healthwatch can use its engagement function to support the development of the JSNA in the specific areas. Obviously, as with everything else under COVID, that function is limited at the moment, but it would be really helpful if we could just put some plans in place for as things move on, and in order to help with the planning to make sure that we can support the engagement as much as possible.
Thank you, Lynn. I'm sure I saw Rachel writing furiously, so I'm sure Rachel would very much welcome that. Rachel, sorry, did you want to come back?
No, I think I think what would be probably helpful is at a future meeting to come and describe and work with colleagues, but to describe and agree how we think that would work, because absolutely I think when I say all partners, I say Healthwatch members, the primary care networks, all of those partners being around the table in each of those areas to support the development. And you know, and how I've seen this, how I've delivered this and seen it work in other areas, you know, involves pharmacies, local charity organisations. There's a whole range of stakeholders in that area, and of course the local population who are involved in developing that. So it's a really good opportunity, and I think if we could articulate that more for the next board, I think that would help and develop it, co-develop it. It would make that a lot clearer to the members of the board, I think.
Excellent. Thank you, Rachel. Julian wanted to speak. If you could just introduce yourself before you speak, Julian.
I'm the chair of Shropshire CCG and also the chair of Telford and Wrekin CCG. I'm a GP, member of a PCN. So I think the JES, Joint Strategic Needs Assessment, is clearly a key piece of work. It's very important. I suppose for me, it's tying everything together, and things are shifting. And I also, the JES, the Joint Strategic Needs Assessment feeds into what we're doing. I can see in the paper it talks about the health and wellbeing strategy. Rachel's just mentioned PCNs, place-based partnerships. Lynn's mentioned, you know, the involvement of patients, and really, I suppose I'm getting a little bit sort of in my head. It's, you know, it's how do we map out how the new Shropshire Integrated Place-Based Board works, what the relationship to their Health and Wellbeing Board is, what the relationship of the Better Care Fund is to those two bodies and to the STP and the PCNs. And clearly we need the Joint Strategic Needs Assessment, and the CCG are clearly behind that and redoing that. And that does allow us to also prioritise the right areas rather than the areas that are just the most popular. You know, we can actually do that in-depth analysis. And I think about COVID and the timetables, I mean, I think in reality we have to accept that COVID is here for quite a long time. You know, obviously with the vaccination we're hoping to reduce the numbers of ill people, reduce the hospital admissions, but it is going to change the way we provide healthcare, and so we do need to be doing business as normal, really, is what I'm trying to say. I think what happened in the first wave is we didn't do business as normal, and that has caused huge ramifications. And I know, you know, you can see in you know, how business at normal is being affected in the hospital, but the work around the hospital, the supporting work around the health and social care system does need to keep going at its normal sort of pace, if not faster, really.
Thank you, Julian. We've heard from contributors to the board. I haven't got any other questions or comment requests coming in. I thank Rachel for presenting the paper. The recommendations are that the Health and Wellbeing Board endorse the current JSNA work programme, the proposed JSNA refresh, and move to a place-based JSNA attached as Appendix 1. Further, that the board notes the current priorities attached at Appendix 2, and they note the proposed work programme and resourcing. So I'm going to propose that, and if there are any voting members of the board who don't agree with the recommendations, could they please indicate on the chat function now? And I'll just give everyone a moment or two to put their notes of dissent. Should there be any on the chat function? I see none, and therefore I can confirm that we have now as a board accepted those recommendations, and I'm pleased, and we'll move on to the next item on the agenda. Thank you, which is item 7. And that is the SEND Local Area Inspection Action Plan update. I think initially I'll hand over to Karen Bradshaw. Karen, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm Karen Bradshaw. I'm the Director of Children's Services for Shropshire, and I will be shortly handing over to Julia Dean, who's our Service Manager for SEND. Perhaps if I could just do a very brief introduction. This report sets out several elements in relation to SEND, and in particular to our recent inspection. I say recent, but actually it was just about 12 months ago. But we all know it's been a very strange and unusual 12 months for us all to be working in. This report includes the outcome of the inspection, the written statement of action that we put together in response to that, which I can confirm was seen as fit for purpose by Ofsted and the CQC. And it also includes an updated strategy for SEND prior to that being finalised and launched publicly. I don't think we intend to dwell too much on the inspection report itself. The report has been out in the public domain since May and has been subject to scrutiny at both the health overview scrutiny and the people scrutiny, so the joint HOSC and the people scrutiny in Shropshire. We'd welcome obviously the board's input specifically on the actions contained in the written statement of action, and importantly progress and support towards delivery of that plan. Just a few other key points before I do hand over to Julia. Just to clarify that the inspection is an inspection of the local area. It's not an inspection of one organisation or another. It's how we collaboratively and collectively deliver the agenda for our young people and families with SEND. The plan itself sets out 6 priorities, and I'm hoping that Julia will sort of talk us through briefly in terms of the progress against those. And finally, it is worth just saying again that progress against this plan has been set against the backdrop of a global pandemic. However, and we've had to work in different ways over the past 12 months. However, we have remained committed to working together collaboratively across the system to make the necessary improvements. So I think now I'd like to hand over to Julia Dean. I'm sure Julia will introduce herself, but Julia has been seconded to project manage the plan across the system, and I emphasise the system, to ensure better outcomes. So Julia, over to you, please.
Thank you, Karen. Yeah, so I'm Julia Dean, as Karen said. I'm Service Manager for SEND and have been Service Manager since the implementation of the reforms in 2014. So have been very much involved in developing our response to the Children and Families Act back from 2014, working with all of our colleagues across the local area to support children and young people and their families with SEND. So we had our inspection, actually it was pretty much a year ago to the date, and the outcome of the inspection, as Karen has said, that we had to produce a written statement of action. The inspectors picked up a number of areas of significant concern. There were 6 areas of significant concern, which is it, and they were, I think it was quite unusual in terms of where those areas of concern sat, because they were quite focused around our health elements of our response to the implementation of reforms. So within the 6 areas, area 1 and 2 were really around the leadership of SEND across the partnership, and they identified that there was a concern with specific weakness within the Shropshire CCG, and I'm saying the Shropshire CCG very specifically because at the time of implementation, you will be aware that we had 2 separate CCGs across Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin, and that position has now changed. So they evidence that through lack of health input into our self-evaluation and our action plans, and they picked up on our ineffective use of data to support commissioning, and that then reflects back onto the previous item around there being no JSNA. So they were very specific around the fact that we didn't have a JSNA that would inform us about what we knew about our local area, and therefore to inform commissioning, effective commissioning for children and young people with SEND, not just as children and young people, but actually to support that commissioning process through into adults and into transition. They also picked up that co-production was not embedded across the whole area, that there were pockets of really good practice in terms of co-production, but not all agencies, not everybody was recognising what co-production was, and we did not have a unified implementation of co-production and a unified understanding of what that actually means. So what have we done about those things? We've reviewed our governance structure. We have strengthened the role of the SEND Strategic Board so that the SEND Strategic Board is now in a better place to provide very sharp challenge if it's felt that that's necessary, but also to provide the support that's needed to ensure that we continue on our journey. Part of the change in the governance structure was to identify SEND champions. I think what we realised was that SEND is everybody's business, and we're not getting that message out very well. I think it's very important to remember that approximately 14% of our population of children and young people have a special educational need, with 3.1% of those requiring of the whole of our population having significant special educational needs that require an EHC plan, and then again a proportion of those requiring very, very specialist access to specialist services. And unless we know who they are, what they need, we're not going to be commissioning the right services to support those needs as they transition on into their adult life. So those were the key areas around governance. The SEND champion role will be to sit across or to recognise, support other strategic groups and partnership groups to recognise that SEND is part of every discussion that we need to be having, that all of our population that we're talking about, there will be a proportion of them that need to be specifically considered because they have SEN or learning disability as they move into the adult world. Other areas that they picked up on, so were the waiting times specifically for speech and language therapy. So this was in the community trust. There were over 1,000 children waiting to be seen at the time of the inspection, with nearly 900 of those having been on that waiting list for more than 18 months. So quite clearly and quite rightly, they picked that up as a very significant issue. Very quickly, Shropshire Community Trust have put in a recovery plan to reduce that waiting list, and that waiting list is now significantly reduced. From September, there were 210 children waiting, with 32 waiting for longer than 18 weeks. So a lot of work has been done to reduce that waiting list, despite the fact that Shropshire Community Trust has obviously been also dealing with the pandemic and having to find different ways of seeing children at a time when face-to-face meetings aren't possible. So the next area, the fourth area, was the Neurodevelopmental Pathway. The inspectors picked up very quickly that there was no clear and effective neurodevelopmental neurodevelopmental pathway across Shropshire, and that this meant that children were not receiving a diagnosis and possibly not getting the right support if they have a specific neurodevelopmental condition, or not having the right support if it's identified that they don't have a neurodevelopmental condition, and accepting the fact that maybe the challenging behaviour that they might be displaying, or the difficult behaviour they might be displaying, is coming from other areas: high anxiety, trauma-based attachment issues. Without that understanding, without that diagnosis, without that pathway, we won't be putting in place the right support to meet need. That really, and I'm going to just change the way that the outcomes have been written, but that really leads into outcome 6, which is around the high level of exclusions within our schools, because I think those two outcomes do, those two priority areas do link together. One of the reasons that many of our schools are permanently excluding children is because they're not understanding their challenging behaviour, and some of that, not all of it, will come down to the fact that we're not diagnosing or recognising the reasons behind that challenging behaviour for some of our children. So we have seen a very sharp increase in the number of exclusions, both permanent and fixed term exclusions for children with SEN, and they are very disproportionately represented across that population, with well over 60% of children being excluded having an SEN, when you consider that the population of SEN is only 14%, so very, very overrepresented, and these are the children that really do need to be in school in order to ensure that they've got good outcomes in their adult lives. It has been difficult to tackle that with the current pandemic situation. We have seen that there has been a reduction in the number of exclusions, but I can't say that that's necessarily down to any specific work that we've done at the moment, with schools being closed for significant periods of time since the inspection. It's very difficult to identify where the work that we have done has had an impact. And we also saw that when schools reopened in September, a significant increase in challenging behaviour in our schools that did lead to a big flurry of further exclusions at that time. And obviously the situation has now changed again, with the majority of children not attending school. So really, it's been really, really difficult to focus on that particular area, but that does not mean that we haven't been working at challenging our schools, supporting our schools, and making sure that we're getting the right training into schools. And then the other area that was picked up was around the EHC needs assessment, and we were criticised because they were very education focused. So the information that we were getting into an education, health and care needs assessment was not as wide as it could have been. And they also picked up on the fact that the provision was, again, very education focused. We weren't getting the support from across the partnership to ensure that those education, health and care plans were of a quality that we would need them to be. So in order to mitigate against that, we have been looking at how we can include advice givers from across health and also across social care, to ensure that they're part of that, more joined up within that process, and recognise what the information is that we need in order to produce a high quality education, health and care plan. One of the things that they will really, or the thing that they'll be really looking at when they come back, we will get an inspection in between 18 months time to 2 years, and they will be looking at the impact of the work that we've done. So they won't be ticking off the actions that we've done. They will want to know that we have made an impact and made a difference, and we will need to ensure that we are able to evidence that. And it's really, therefore, really important that we're including our SEND population and ensuring that they are part and parcel of any of the changes that we make, so that they are able to articulate how they have felt or that they recognise that changes have been made and that we have progressed. Thank you. Is there any questions or anything that I might have missed?
Chair, perhaps if I could just come back in before we throw it open, is that okay? Okay, thank you. I think, you know, one of the things that we would, of course, say is that probably the biggest area of progress that we have made is around our partnership working. Julia said earlier on that we have changed our governance arrangements. We have now got what we believe to be a strong partnership board with a good level of commitment from all partners, including obviously the local authority, the CCG and health partners, and also importantly our parents and carers. And so with that strong partnership in place, then that gives us the real energy, power and leverage actually to move this plan forward. So I think, I was hoping that our Parents and Carers Council would be on the line today, but and obviously I can't speak for them, but I think I'd be fairly confident that they would say that they recognise that that partnership working has made significant progress since the inspection. So I think that's really positive. Thank you.
You're on mute, Chair.
Now you're frozen.
Come on.
I think you're there now, Lee. No, you're not. Yep. Dean, do you want to take over while Lee? Oh, are you there?
No,
back now, Lee?
Am I back?
Yeah,
You're
looks
back.
like it.
You're
yeah,
back.
okay.
Fine. Yes. Apologies. For some reason or another, the when I swapped from the attendees to the chat screen, it wouldn't allow me to unmute. So thank you, Karen and Julia, for presenting the paper and all for the considerable amount of work that I know has gone in both by yourselves and by partners, particularly to get the written statement of action agreed and signed off, considering the issues in the system following the presentation, following the inspection. Considerable work being done across the system, as you say, to get us there. I'm sure that colleagues from from PACT who work with you as representatives of parents and carers will have been working with you. I know personally a couple of the individuals that you've been working for, having met them before, so I'm sure that they will have supported the work that you've been involved with and put in the challenge, no doubt, when they've felt that the system could do better. Could I introduce Ed Potter? If you could introduce yourself, Ed, and speak.
Hi, hello, Ed Potter, lead member for Children's Services, Shropshire Council. I'm sorry, I was jumping in and out. Signal was poor, so I might have missed a few bits, and it might have already been said. But what I wanted to say is I think there's a real positive move and direction with this, and collaborative working, and hopefully we can, with a lot of working together across health, across the local authority, we can really make some positive changes to young people's lives in Shropshire. We have the momentum now, and I know it's a very challenging a situation we find ourselves in. We've had a very challenging nearly 12 months with COVID, and it's not over yet, but I'm pleased to see this progress been made, and the positivity around this when I've been attending various meetings is great to see. So that was just what I wanted to say, and thank everyone very much for all their hard work that's gone into this. It hasn't been easy, but and there's a long way to go yet, but I'm sure we're heading in the right direction now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Well, there's a plan, and that's the start of the process. Absolutely. If there's no other comments or questions, I'd like to take us to the recommendations, and clearly as a board these are going to be particularly important on an issue such as this. The recommendations are that the Health and Wellbeing Board endorse the actions contained within the written statement of action and the priorities contained within the SEND strategy, and that the Health and Wellbeing Board agree to review progress against these actions and to receive periodic updates, including holding organisations to account as necessary, and that the Health and Wellbeing Board acknowledge and endorse the priority that this work needs to be afforded across the system in order to make the necessary improvements. And we know how important that is, don't we? So I am going to propose that. Ed, as the Cabinet Member for Children's Services, are you happy to second that?
More than happy to second that.
Okay, and I will wait to see whether any voting members of the board disagree by putting their comments in the chat function. And I'll give colleagues who might disagree with this the opportunity just to put those in the chat function. And I can see no adverse comments, so I will interpret that as the board being in favour, and I will formally accept those recommendations to the Health and Wellbeing Board. Thank you, colleagues, for your contributions, and particularly given the size and complexity of the document, for keeping your summary and timing tight. That is appreciated given the size of the agenda. So we'll move on to item 8, which is an update on the remit of the Information, Advice and Support Service. And I'm pleased to welcome Jackie Jeffrey, who is attending to present this paper. Jackie, can I hand over to you?
Yes, thank you very much. This really follows on really nicely from the last 2 items on the JSNA and the SEND action plan. So yeah, thank you very much for allowing me to do this. So yes, as I introduced at the beginning of the meeting, Jackie Jeffrey, and I'm the Chief Officer of Citizens Advice Shropshire. And Citizens Advice Shropshire were commissioned to host the IAS service. So I'm here presenting today as our manager can't attend today. The report, and I'm not going to go through it in detail, it's there for your information. It really just highlights the background to the service, what we're about, provided it shows you the quality of the service that we provide from our service users, but also gives you an idea that this is a system approach, because it's joint commissioned with health and the council, and we're there to support people across educational, health and social care. So the information's in there, and I'm just going to give you a brief overview. The paper does recommend that how health and social care leaders can make the best use of this service within what we deliver. So as part of the Children and Families Act 2014, it's a legal requirement for local authorities to ensure that children and young people with special educational needs and or disabilities and their parents and carers have access to an impartial information, advice and support service, and that's what we are all about. So we provide that advice and support to children 0 to 25 and young people 16 to 25 who have or may have special educational needs or disabilities. So we support people in if they think there is, what's the approach, what are the options there for them, what help and support that they can get. And it's really key that you know that you can make best use of us, and not just for your own service users across the system, but also what's great about Citizens Advice Shropshire hosting this service is that it integrates in with our data systems and helps you understand the needs of young people, families and carers in this area, and we can feed that kind of those trends and that data and profiling into the joint JSNA review, but also we work very closely with Julia and their services to say, well, these are the issues that we have with our young people and our parents and carers at the minute. And kind of a bit of a plug there is that actually, if you want to see if the action plan is working and the things that you have has made a difference, you can look at that our data and the issues that our parents and carers are coming through with to see if there's been a change in the trends and change in the problems that we've had. So please do use us as part of this review and thing. So that's a kind of my bit plug about the Shropshire IAS service. So the kind of things that we do is we listen to parents' concerns, we provide the relevant information and help them to explore their options of what they can do. We support parents to prepare for upcoming meetings, including annual reviews around educational health and social care plans. We can explain written reports by professionals, and we can provide information about SEN and disability law to enable parents to make informed decisions. So that's really about empowering our parents and carers and young people 16 to 25 to understand and to be able to act on their own behalf. We definitely work to develop positive relationships and improve communication between schools and the local authority as well. We're kind of an independent leg of the triangle in those kind of reviews and relationships as well. We have a load of resources on our website, so please go. It's on our Citizens Advice Shropshire website, and there's a page there that's the IAS, and you can find out all our fact sheets, resources, any online training that we have, and we've been developing YouTube videos where to help parents through the process when there's a review or if they want to apply for an educational health and social care plan. And there's information there for young people too. We also employ a youth worker to help with the engagement of young people of that in transition, and that's 16 plus. COVID, I mean, we say it in all our meetings today, COVID's really had an impact on our ability to engage with young people, and that's across the board on youth work and schools as well. And I'm hoping that we still get the ability going forward when we come out of this pandemic to actually start that engagement work as well. So we empower our young people through transition to understand what their options and what their legal rights are. So that's IAS service. As I said, who's it's for? It is a system approach. It's at the IAS service, when it went out for commissioning a few years ago, was one of the first of the IAS services where there was a joint commissioning with health. And, you know, as Julia said, there's a lack of kind of health input in there. And we see that in educational health and social care plans, that there's a lot of education element around that and very little input about health and social care. So, you know, use us and help us to improve that too. The only other side of the IAS work we do is about disability and benefit support. So if we do have a parent that is going through an education, health and social care plan, or that their child or the young person has a disability, we can help them apply for disability benefits, appeals and reviews on that score as well. And we feed all that into Julia's team and give her all that data as well. So that's us. Please use us, please promote us with your service users, and if you need any data or understanding about the education, health and social care needs of 0 to 25 or the parents and the carers, please contact us. Leslie's email's on the report, and I'm open to any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie, and thank you for paper and the presentation of the superb work that the IAS service does. Two things while I'm waiting for comments in the chat box for anyone else who wants to input into the discussion. For me, I thought what was interesting was that you said that you don't actually need, so an individual, whether they're a child with SEND or their parents, they don't actually need to have a diagnosis. In fact, it's you know, if they've got concerns or this is something that's concerning them, they don't need a formal gateway, as it were, of a diagnosis before they can access the service. So it's open access to the service. So I think that's really important, and that's obviously very valuable. And the only other comment I suppose I'd make, having looked at the paper, is I assume that you do capture the sources of your referral when you have those discussions with clients. So yes. I suppose, and I'm not trying to teach my mother how to suck eggs, but I do think that it would be helpful to know for the future to what extent your referral pathways have changed as a result of both the written statement of action for following the SEND inspection, but also following the opportunity to present the paper here at the Health and Wellbeing Board, when all of those colleagues from across the system who perhaps might not have been aware of the IAS service have now got the ability to be talking to colleagues in their team about to what extent they're making the best opportunity of the service. So my suggestion is that you perhaps have a look at benchmarking those referrals and see to what extent presenting the paper here and quite rightly promoting the service has on the profile of your referrals.
I think that's brilliant. Yeah, we certainly do. I mean, Julia will know we have that spreadsheet that we send as part of our reporting, which has so much data in it, and part of that will be referrals and where we're getting, you know, our client, our parents or young people accessing our service through the helpline, or is it coming through support workers and SEN officers in schools as well. So we can definitely track that. So that'll be brilliant. Yeah.
Okay, Jackie, that's lovely. So I've not had any other requests or comments or challenge from colleagues on the chat function, which I assume means that they're all really excited and they're going to be going away promoting your service. So thank you for joining us today and presenting the paper, Jackie. That is great. And I think our recommendation is to make sure that everyone makes the best use of the service. So that is great.
Thank you.
Okay, if I can move on to item 9 on the agenda, which is social prescribing, something that's very close to my heart. I'm a very keen advocate of social prescribing and very keen on its increased profile and resourcing across Shropshire. So I understand that my colleague Penny Basin is going to be taking this paper. Is that correct, Penny?
That's right. Thank you very much, Lee.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, Penny Basin, Head of Service Joint Partnerships. So thanks for including this report in the Health and Wellbeing Board this time. I think the board has received papers a number of times on social prescribing, so I won't go through, and you've had the paper with the pack, so I won't go through some of the details that you'll have known from previously about sort of how the programme works, just sort of some key updates. So we're really pleased to say that we're now working really closely with all 4 PCNs in Shropshire. We've been working with the South East and the South West throughout this financial year. And of course, that's building on working with 12 practices across the county over the last 3 to 4 years on social prescribing, developing our programme. But now, as social prescribing is coming to the forefront of working within PCNs, we've been working more closely in that way, and more recently with the North PCN and the Shrewsbury PCN. So we have recruited 2 posts to bolster our provision across the whole of the county, which is really, really positive. The other thing to say is that since COVID, or as we were recognising things needed to change with COVID, we moved to working collaboratively with our GP practices in an online way. So we've been able to continue the provision, but doing it online or on the telephone. But we've also been, despite the fact that we were still working with the PCNs throughout this year, we've opened up the offer to the whole of the county with referral mechanisms coming from a range of places. So through social care, through our customer services, through the job centre. So we've been taking referrals from across the county for this financial year, in particular in response to wanting to help people in the different ways that people were struggling through COVID. So that has been going on. An update on the data, which we're quite excited about. I think we've been looking at obviously we had our evaluation report, which this board has heard before, and I've reminded people of those figures because they were so good. But just to say that we've been able to keep up the good work with that. So 71% of the people going through the programme reporting an improvement with their concern. We asked them through the Measure Yourself concern and wellbeing for 2 concerns. Concern 1 was 70% improvement, and concern 2 a 67% improvement, with 51% voicing improvement on their wellbeing and 55 with improvement on their loneliness score. So those we take as really good measures as well. We're doing the right things, but we're always looking for room for improvement as well, and helpful suggestions from others. Happy to take those on. One of the areas we've also been working on is and collaborative really in the system, because there's a few different ways in which people can access support now for pre-diabetes. So the programme takes referrals from GPs or others in the practice and from other areas, as I've described, but we also work with the GP practices to audit records for particular health concerns, and pre-diabetes, diabetes and cardiovascular disease are those sort of top concerns that we look at. With regard to pre-diabetes, we also have in the county, as there is nationally, the National Diabetes Prevention Programme. So we work collaboratively with that programme to refer people in, but what we also do is make sure that people are ready to sort of uptake some of those programmes, and by doing that we've noticed a real improvement. So with one practice there was 64 people attended social prescribing, looking at their HbA1c, which is the measure of their blood measure around diabetes. 56 of those 64 showed a reduction in their HbA1c, and 40% reduced their HbA1c to within normal range, which is so positive. And we've been talking about another programme that I believe is delivered in Blackburn, where the patient activation measure was used. That's another measure we do use for people with long-term conditions. And we're offering something similar here in this way, and so we're really looking at how we can roll this out or develop this more in this area. And the patient activation measure is a score of 1 to 4, and it understands somebody's ability to manage their own condition. How activated is somebody to do what they need to do to keep themselves or improve their health condition, or keep themselves as well as possible. And a 4 being very, very good, they're very capable, very able, understand what they need to do, and a 1 not so much, so that's the lower end. And what that sort of paper that we looked at from Blackburn was saying was that when people were taking up the activity like the NDPP, or taking up those support mechanisms in the community, most of those people were already a 3 or a 4 activated, so they were quite activated. They would go along to their the provision that was available, because they knew that would help them, and they knew that's what they needed to do. But I think what that meant was that we possibly were missing those 1s and 2s that really needed that information, but weren't motivated to get there. And we feel quite strongly that this is a really good area for development for us. So thinking about those, if we can implement patient activation measures around long-term conditions more systematically, we can really work through social prescribing and health coaching on those 1s and 2s to get them to a place where they're really able and willing to take up all the activity and all the provision there is in the local area to help them with their health condition. So that's just, I think, the things that I'm particularly excited and interested in. Obviously, that key that we're rolling out across the county, and that we're always looking for ways and places in which we can improve. And then the final place I just wanted to update on, and it is in the paper, is developing our social prescribing for children and young people. So we're looking through developing. We've been working over the last 6 months or so to really understand what we need to do. The Southwest PCN has agreed to fund a link worker specifically for children and young people. So the advert is about to go out this month. We're also looking to increase provision for children and young people around the social prescribing agenda. So we've been working with sort of warming up the sector, the voluntary and community sector, having conversations on a regular basis around what kind of provision we might need. And we've also, through this programme, been talking to children and young people themselves about the kinds of things that they're interested in and the things that would motivate them or what's missing in their lives. And of course, this year it's really been around COVID, but we want to look beyond that as well. So there's a kind of immediate need around COVID, and then there's that kind of longer term aspirations around supporting children and young people to thrive. And a key part of this has also been to link in with all the other things that are available for children and young people to ensure that we're filling a gap and we're not duplicating. So that's really important part of this, and that's why we're doing it as a pilot to begin with. So linking in with schools, linking in with GP practices, linking in with the other provision around children and young people's emotional health and well-being as well. And we certainly have been taking on board the stakeholder engagement with GPs as well. So conversations have taken us along the road of mentoring being a really key part of this, and we're really looking at that as well and looking what else is happening around the country around mentoring and around the county. We already do have some provision in the county. And the other aspect is some really quick access. So children and young people, that my experience of my own teenagers is that when they're engaged in that moment, they will engage in that moment. And if you let it slide, even half an hour, it's gone. So we need to do something that's really responsive to the needs and to that moment when a child or a young person is willing to engage. So those are kind of, and the final thing that we've really got into this program that we're keen on is that the engagement with children and young people is constant through the whole program. So we're not saying we're going to just engage now and understand what children and young people are telling us today. We're saying that it's part of the whole program going forward, so we can constantly adapt to those rising needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Penny. Great paper and some really exciting metrics coming out of the PCNs. I've got a few colleagues who want to contribute. If I could start with Iqbal Zafar from MPFT. Just introduce yourself. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dr. Zafar Iqbal. I'm an Associate Medical Director at MPFT and public health background. Chair, I'm just having difficulty holding myself back. This is so exciting and there's so much to commend on this. I'm absolutely thrilled that there's a kind of evaluation going along with it where we're measuring well-being measures as well as physical health measures such as HbA1c. And I think this is just fantastic. And I've got a couple of comments on possibly the future. I think. I mean, first of all, you've got some amazing data, and you must publish this. And more than happy to help you to publish this outside. I think because there are many of these schemes up and down the country, but not everyone is collecting the data that you're collecting. Secondly, I think there's enormous opportunities to scale this up, both in terms of numbers and also the areas that we can actually go into, like frailty or mental health, etc. And my final comment is that I've been involved in a project where there's a digital platform for social prescribing, and with that makes the referral process, the data collection process so much easier, and happy to discuss that with you outside the meeting. But really well done, really exciting.
That's great. I would love to pick that up outside the meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Zafar. So could I introduce Rachel? You introduce yourself and come in.
Thanks, Rachel Robinson, Director of Public Health. Yeah, I mean, I think Zafar said a lot of what I was going to say. I think it's nice to take a moment to pause and look at how far the programme's come. I mean, to say that there's coverage across Shropshire, everybody's engaging, and I think it gives such a strong foundation to build on. I share Lee's passion around social prescribing. I think it's so fundamental. It is a building block that we can build in different approaches, different scale, different angles. The debt that we know that's coming out the welfare side, how we link those in and just build on this model and I know that all that is already happening, but I just thought it was just a moment to pause at how fundamental to this is, not just for Shropshire, but it's some of that STP work we were talking about, that communities, that left shift that we've been that we talk about in terms of that prevention approach, and that engagement with our communities that's come out so strongly through all of COVID as well. So it wasn't so much it was a comment, but also thanks to the team, because I know everybody's worked really, really hard, and as you said, that rigorous approach that hasn't been necessarily seen in other areas, just because it has. I know the team would say this, and I have seen this in other areas. It's an uphill struggle sometimes to get people on board with this. I know the NHS have embraced it now, but it's taking that more widely, because we keep coming back to some of this, and having that evidence to demonstrate those outcomes is so important. So it was more of a comment really, and a reassurance that this is at the one of our priorities. It's remained one of our priorities, and we see this as really being fundamental to work streams moving forward. So just to sort of say that. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. And Tanya, if you could introduce yourself and come in.
Thanks, Chair. It's Tanya Mars, Exec Director for Adults Housing and Public Health. And going third means that Rachel and Zafar have taken my comments, but I will just say, obviously, thanks to Penny for such a positive paper. And wow, what data! 51% of people saying that they've improved well-being, and 55% improvement on loneliness. And at this point, I'd like to sell the winter scheme that we've got running, the Wellbeing Independence Partnership, which is jointly funded with the PCNs, the CCG and Shropshire Local Authority. This is a collaborative with our 5 voluntary and community organisation, that's Age UK, Shropshire Rural Community Charity, the Rural Voluntary Service, Oswestry Community Action and Mayfair. We've commissioned this service in response to our vulnerable population to maintain people's physical and emotional well-being through the winter with the effects of COVID-19. This service will provide support, shopping and delivery, connecting people to local support groups, telephone companionship for isolation and lonely people, and wellbeing home visits where COVID restrictions allow. So it's just to say this is an amazing service, and one that I want to kind of support and sell to the Health and Wellbeing Board members, and I know works hand in hand with our social prescribers, because without this important service they don't really have people to refer on to. So in terms of those improved outcomes and data around wellbeing and loneliness, the WIPS contract really supports that. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Tanya. And Julian, if you'd like to introduce yourself and come in.
Julian Povey, I'm Chair of Shropshire CCG. I mean, again, I think everything that's been said so far is right. This is a really good programme, and the type of social prescribing it's doing with the interventions and the support to people is really good. Moving into the sort of local based sort of partnerships, and also on the back of the winter pressure link workers, I also wonder whether there's any value in having a broader report on the total impact of these wider initiatives, because certainly within each practice, certainly in Shropshire, all but one practice has got a community care coordinator, and they're working on a weekly basis with a large number of patients. And also we also have a number of practices that take part in the Compassionate Communities scheme alongside the Shropshire Hospice. And I know there's a debate about whether that's social prescribing, or whether you've got, how your purist definition of what social prescribing is, but it's all sort of interventions that are led by the health and social care sector into people's lives to try and improve their lives and help them through a non-medicalised way. And I think that drawing them all together would show, the number of contacts through this would be multiplied a number of times if we could account all that data and show the overall impact. And I think certainly, as I said, once we move into local place-based partnerships, to be able to demonstrate what each locality is doing and learn from each locality, having that wider data would, I think, be quite helpful.
Thanks, Julian. When I've got one other speaker, but I would like to respond to some of the aspects of your view on that. Karen Bradshaw would like to come in. If you could introduce yourself, Karen.
Thank you, Chair. Karen Bradshaw, Director of Children's Services for Shropshire. Again, just a comment rather than a question. I think the outcomes of this are really impressive and really exciting, and I'd really like to see those replicated for children. The framework is there, and I think I'd be really keen that we can move that along at pace. All of these issues are affecting and impacting on children, especially at this point in time. So again, the more that we can put this type of provision in place and initiative in place for children, then the greater impact it will have for them, and the reduction of negative impacts of the current pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. And I suppose, Julian, my response to you, and you know, I probably have the benefit of being involved with social prescribing from the beginning, I think, as other colleagues have been. I think it's really interesting the situation with particularly the community and care coordinators, and we know that the work that they're doing is very much supportive of the broad agenda of social prescribing. But I think if we go back to Zafir's first comment about you know, the evidence base and the way that we established social prescribing in Shropshire based on being led by the data and having a formality to the way that we assessed individuals so that we could clinically approach their improvements, you know, whether that's MyCore or those other measures that we decided early on to adopt. I think we absolutely need to capture the broader work that's undertaken across general practices. But I think there is mileage in discussions about how we align that formal data-led approach assessment across all of the individuals who are providing this type of input. Because if we're going to continue to have the strength of the argument and the clinical evidence of the impact of our interventions, then we need to adopt that robust approach across all of those interventions as far as that's reasonably practicable.
No, I think that's right for this programme, but I think most healthcare professionals will view social prescribing in its wider context. I'm not saying that we should draw those numbers into this analysis, and keeping this analysis separate is very important, and there's a wealth of information there and it is very important. But I was just meaning more as a representation of what we're doing rather than as a research project to prove its benefit, because we see its benefit on a daily basis in the practice. Those workers are key. So I don't disagree with what you're saying. I think, you know, I've had a long discussion over many years with Penny about about this sort of very stringent definition of what counts as social prescribing and what doesn't. But I think, you know, as a GP, the value of social intervention and empowering communities and peer support is amazing, and that, you know, we just need to be demonstrating what we're doing. I know this is a separate, I would agree with you, this is a separate data set and is well researched and well evidenced, and showing the improvements is incredibly important. But so my point was about a wider information rather than this, I think.
Okay, yeah, well, that's fine. I mean, it would obviously seek to widen and publicised all of those interventions and give an idea of the full richness of the opportunities. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, my thanks to Penny for the paper, and you know, colleagues have said before how excited they are. I'm absolutely thrilled. And certainly my colleague Joe Robinson and I were pleased to be invited by the LGA for a session where we joined colleagues from across the UK looking at best practice in this field, and it was really interesting to see the impact, and let's not kid ourselves, the impact that the NHS long-term plan had, and that shift to providing funding for social prescribing in primary care, which has been so significant in terms of that sea change. So thanks to all of your contributions and the paper presented so ably by Penny. The recommendation is that the Health and Wellbeing Board note and endorse progress, and I'm sure that we would all want to endorse that. Thank you. So item 10 on the agenda is the COVID-19 update and flu immunisations update, and I know that Rachel Robinson will be starting us off on this paper. Colleagues from the CCG will be joining in as well. Over to you, Rachel.
Thank you, Chair. So Rachel Robinson, Director of Public Health, Shropshire. I'm just going to very briefly touch on flu, and then we'll move on to COVID, and I'll give a general update, and then I know Dave's kindly offered to come in and talk particularly about the vaccination, which we can cover. So in terms of flu, I think we've already said, and it was said earlier, obviously flu is a really important one of our programmes that we bring to the Health and Wellbeing Board every year. The pressure on the NHS in terms of flu and ensuring people get the flu vaccine certainly improves outcomes and reduces that pressure. So really important that we increase uptake. You can see from the paper that the uptake this year has been especially pleasing. It's very well received, and numbers have been particularly high across the country, despite the more ambitious targets, but particularly in Shropshire, we've had some really impressive outcomes, particularly in those at risk under 65 groups. And then obviously you can see the rates of increase in our children, and in pregnancy as well. We've got one of the highest rates in the region, which is really pleasing to see. So a huge effort to everybody for delivering this, and we do know that flu is circulating less in the community this year, but I think the uptake in the vaccination programmes and obviously social distancing and other measures will have an impact on that. So I don't propose to go into any more detail on the flu. I'll move on to talk about COVID if that's okay. So obviously within the COVID, within the paper, there is some figures, but I'll just give you some more up-to-date figures on COVID. It is a difficult position in Shropshire as it is nationally and across the West Midlands. The rural areas have seen the impact in the second wave comes secondly after those urban areas. Certainly since Shropshire, we have seen in the second wave, the cases peaked at 300 cases in one day, which was on the 4th of January. So certainly we are seeing the impact of the new variant, which we believe is in Shropshire, certainly accounting for the majority of cases in the country, but also that Christmas mixing will inevitably have had an impact. So unfortunately, we have seen our cases rising. Our current rate is 450 per 100,000. That's dropped slightly since from a peak 2 days previously of 473. But that is a rapid increase, colleagues will note, from where we were at Christmas, which was around 100 per 100,000. That rate, unfortunately, has also increased in our older population. In the last few days, we have seen a slight levelling off in our cases until yesterday, when we again saw an increase in the number of cases that were coming through. Obviously, we are then seeing the impact on both hospitals and unfortunately also on deaths. We have seen an increase in deaths, particularly in this last week. So this new variant and COVID is no less dangerous and concerning for our population than it was in the first wave. In terms of other things just to mention, just for colleagues to be of a note, we are seeing an increase in household mixing, as you would expect, and particularly now as we are in lockdown. That's 54% of our cases in the last 2 weeks have been linked to households transmission. So to move on, I think in terms of what we can do about this, people across Shropshire have been phenomenal. We had a huge push in November, and we saw our numbers drop dramatically. So as rapidly as they can increase, we can see rates decrease, and people have been working extremely hard. I know what we're asking people to do is obviously follow the advice, to know that the new variant will be in Shropshire, and to be extra careful because of that. Think, is this essential? Is this something we can and should do? Can we do this? But actually, should we do this? We need to reduce contact and follow those rules. And I know people across Shropshire are working very, very hard to do that. So we're really asking people to sort of step up those efforts again. I think the second thing, part of this, is obviously around testing. So making sure people do get tested, and we have, colleagues will hopefully note, and in the media, but just to draw people's attention to the increased provision we have around testing within Shropshire, both from those who are symptomatic. We're asking anybody who's symptomatic, not just the common symptoms, 3 symptoms, but also the mildest, less common symptoms of COVID, to come and be tested through the 119 national route. We've got a variety of, we've got 3 local sites that will be open. One is opening hopefully next week, and we've got 2 other sites, as well as a mobile site, and as well as really good uptake in Shropshire, 40% uptake around postal testing. So please, good accessibility, encouraging people to get tested, any symptoms, no matter how mild. And for those who are asymptomatic, don't have any symptoms at all, and are going about their normal business, have to go to work, key workers, and are not able to work from home, particularly in those groups, we are encouraging those people to come and get tested at one of our asymptomatic local testing sites, and we're adding capacity throughout the month. So that's testing. I think the final bit, the next bit I wanted to update on again is protecting the vulnerable, which is a really important part of what we're doing. And anybody who's worried, we've talked about vulnerable in terms of health needs, but also in terms of those social needs and those wider needs, which have been inequalities being exacerbated. I can't say the word, but but we've got a huge amount of support that's available, and we are pushing that out. There's a key number, there's our website, one phone call asking people just to ring through if they have any welfare needs, concerns, food needs, mental health needs. We're really encouraging people to come forward and seek the help so we can support those people. And so I think the final part of what we're doing to respond to this, and the other really important one, is obviously vaccinations. So I was planning to pause there and then bring in Dave for the vaccinations bit, and I can pick any comments up as well.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. I've just got one comment in relation to the asymptomatic testing. The paper says that sites are in Shrewsbury and shortly in Craven Arms, and that information can be found in the council press release. But is that a telephone contact to make those, or are these a drop-in feature?
No, so these are so Craven Arms is open now. So since the paper is open, that's a very good was written. Very good point. Craven Arms is up and running, and we hope to have within the next 2 weeks 3 or possibly 4 more sites up and running across the north and other parts of the county. It is a booking service at the moment for those sites, but we will be having a book-in, and the new sites that are coming on board will be drop-in. It's an online booking form.
It's an online booking form through the council as opposed to through 119.
Yes, so the asymptomatic is being run by the council.
Okay.
The symptomatic continues to be run nationally.
Fine.
And at the moment it is booking, but we will be introducing drop-in services, and we'll press that, make that available in the press and through the board as well.
Okay, thank you. That's fine. Penny, if you could introduce yourself and come in before we go on to vaccination.
Sorry, just very quickly, Penny Basin, Head of Service Joint Partnerships. Just to say, there's still some conversation going on in the background. Sorry, not meaning to contradict, about whether all of them will be appointment systems. I think we're asking for all of them to be at the moment. Anyway, but everything's happening very rapidly and everything's changing on a day-by-day basis. But they're currently appointments, and there's a website, the web page on Shropshire Council will be the place to go to click to book for or to get the information of what to do next.
Okay, thanks, Penny. We'll make sure that goes out and press release from the council as we would do normally. Thank you. So I think, as Rachel was suggesting, we'll move to Dave Evans initially to talk through vaccination.
Thanks, Chair. Dave Evans, Accountable Officer for Shropshire CCG and Telford and Wrekin CCG. The vaccination programme, as I'm sure everyone will appreciate, is a huge undertaking by the NHS, both nationally and locally. It is definitely a marathon, not a sprint, but we are working incredibly hard locally, and that's all partners across health and local authority partners as well, in terms of trying to make sure we vaccinate the public as quickly as we possibly can. So we did start the vaccination programme before Christmas. We are rapidly scaling and ramping up the vaccination programme to bring both more sites on board, but to make sure that we have more vaccination capacity to enable us to make sure we maximise supply. A couple of comments I'd like to make straight off, and I'll go into a bit more detail. Every vaccine that comes into the county is being administered as quickly as we possibly can do it. So I checked yesterday evening because there's been a query regionally about whether there's any stockpile of vaccinations locally. There is no stockpile of vaccinations across Shropshire. We are using every vaccine that comes into the county as quickly as possible. There are still supply chain issues with the vaccine as production gets ramped up by the manufacturers, and I can understand that. So I think it's fair to say that our ability to ramp up and roll out is partially restricted by vaccine supply, but we are committed to making sure that we do as much as we can as quickly as possible. Now, the recommendations nationally in terms of policy are really clear about who gets vaccinated first. So there are 10 cohorts of the population where it is expected that they get vaccinated before the general public. I'm not going to go into those in detail. We are very clear, as with national policy, that we will vaccinate cohorts 1 and 2 first. That essentially is care home residents, over 80s and care and NHS frontline staff. In the first few weeks of the vaccination programme, we have been delivering approximately 75% of available vaccine to over 80s, which includes care homes. About 20% has been going vaccinating care staff, and about 5% to clinically vulnerable NHS staff. We are on target to achieve all care homes being vaccinated by the end of this month. However, we have been asked in the last 24 hours, could we bring that forward? So the team are working at the moment to see whether or not we can vaccinate all care home residents by the end of next week, and that will be Sunday, I mean by the end of next week. So I'm hopeful we may be able to get there, but I can't say for certain at the moment we can get there, but we are certainly working on it. We are equally committed to delivering vaccinations for all of the over 80s population and frontline care and NHS staff by mid-February. It's challenging though. So we have got centres at the moment at SEC as a hospital hub. We have a hospital hub running at Robert Jones and Agnes Hunt, and we have South East Shropshire hub working in Bridgnorth. We expect to bring services on in Ludlow within the next 2 weeks, and also Whitchurch and other areas of the county, but I can't give definite dates for those at the moment. I'd like to be far more open about communication than perhaps people understand, but there is a very clear centrally controlled message around comms at the moment. And I apologise for that, because clearly this is an anxious time for our population, and I completely understand that, and people wish to know when they get vaccinated, and I can understand that too, and I'm sure we'd all like to be vaccinated tomorrow if we could. The reality is we have to protect the most vulnerable in our society. That is what we're doing with the rollout of the vaccination programme, and will continue to do. People will get a letter through the post asking them to book an appointment when it is the appropriate time for them to have their vaccination. And I would ask people to be patient. I understand people are anxious, but please be patient. We won't forget you. We will get to you. The other thing I'd want to say, Lee, just in closing before I hand over for questions, is vaccination does give us light at the end of the tunnel, but I have to say at the moment it is a very long tunnel. And to put it into context, the 10 groups I mentioned are across Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin as a whole are 325,000 out of our population. That's a huge amount of people to vaccinate. You know, by the time we get to the second doses, that's 650 doses we'll be looking to give by spring. That's no easy task to achieve, which is why I'm asking people to be patient. But we need to try and encourage people to follow the rules. This is a difficult virus. It clearly, the variant is far more transmissible, and Rachel will know more about that than I do, but clearly is much more easy to transmit between people. We're seeing a rise in prevalence rates, as Rachel has indicated. This is beginning to put pressure on the NHS. The vaccination itself is not the panacea. We have to try and encourage all of our family and friends to follow the rules, because that's the only way we are really going to get on top of this virus and begin to get back to a degree of normality that I think we would all like to. So my take home message is, please encourage people to follow the rules. Please follow the rules ourselves. Happy to take questions, as I'm sure Rachel is.
Okay, thank you, David, and thank you for being as clear with us as the centrally mandated communication rules allow you to. I'm pleased to say I had a public, and it is a public message this morning to say that Church Stretton Medical Practice is starting vaccinating today. So they're starting with care homes, and they're cracking on. So I think for me it's really interesting. I've had several phone calls from concerned residents. I know other Shropshire councillors have had considerable amount of communication and anxiety from residents. And I will just say that I think that it is unfortunate and beyond the control locally that we weren't able as a system to provide more assurance as to timescales of vaccines, because we have of our own, the system really have walked into a storm of anxiety because of this lack of a proper centrally managed communication plan that has given people more assurance. And particularly when and I'm allowed to say this, but in the case of my parents who live locally, all 5 of their best friends, who are couples of the same age, all over 80s, who live in neighbouring counties, and this is 5 other couples, all 5 other couples have all had their vaccines. And so you can imagine the anxiety, and I think that I welcome the fact that we're getting there. I'm pleased, and I think the public will be pleased that we are delivering all of the vaccines that we're receiving in Shropshire. So, you know, everything that can be done is being done, and that, you know, there is light at the end of the tunnel. I know that Dean Carroll wanted to come in. Dean, if you could introduce yourself.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, Councillor Dean Carroll, portfolio holder for Adult Social Care, Public Health and Climate Change. There's a few things that I want to cover on this subject, and I will come on to COVID vaccines momentarily. But firstly, I do want to talk briefly about the flu vaccine programme, because although it's taken a slightly backseat in terms of public perception this year, the take-up has been very good, probably prompted by coronavirus over the course of the year. What I would like to point out is actually our targets for next year are extremely ambitious. They are aspirational, I think it's fair to say, and we will be doing very well to maintain the take-up levels and stabilise the take-up levels that we have achieved for this year. But it's absolutely right that we have the ambition of increasing that. So without wishing to pour water on the fire, I do want to try and manage expectation a little around that. Coming on to COVID vaccines, everything yourself, Dave, Rachel have said is completely true, and I endorse everything you've said. Specifically, I'm probably the person who's received, the leader and I are probably the people who've received more phone calls and emails, particularly over Christmas, than anybody else in relation to people's concerns and anxieties over vaccines. And the message that I would like to give publicly, assuming there may be some people listening, is that we are doing our very best as a system, local authority, local health partners, as a system, to try and get more information released. The problem is at a regional and national level, as has been said, but the absence of publicly available information shouldn't be taken as an absence of activity or effort on our part to accelerate announcements, to accelerate communication, and ultimately to increase the capacity that we have in Shropshire. And I have heard numerous times, including from members of the press, said that if we were perhaps more proactive or more publicly vocal that the squeaky wheel may get the oil, but that is categorically not the case. We have been as proactive and as vocal with regional and national NHS leads as any other authority in England, and we are being treated exactly the same as every other authority in England. Some may have other approaches to it, but they are not getting any other results, and I think that that's important to remember. That being said, I do think there is absolutely a need for NHS colleagues regionally and nationally to hear the frustration that we as a system and our residents are experiencing through the inability to share that information. I think that's really important message to be taken back to our regional and national colleagues. In terms of the COVID situation, absolutely, we all need to follow the advice, follow the guidance, reach out for the support. I'm not sure whether, I know Rachel mentioned the phone number, I'm not sure whether we gave the phone number earlier. It's 0345 678 9028, or visit the Shropshire Council website. There are loads of community groups active all around the county as well, doing fantastic work, and we should pay tribute to them as well. But please follow the advice and reach out when you need support, and that goes for the practical support as well as the emotional and mental health support. Thank you, Chairman. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Dean. Julian, would you like to introduce yourself and speak?
Julian Povey, Chair of Shropshire CCG and a local GP. Just a couple of comments really, and I'm happy also to be answering questions if needed. I mean, firstly about the flu vaccination. Now, I think the increase in uptake this year is really good. Obviously, patients are still getting letters, particularly the 50 to 64-year-old group, about coming in for their vaccination. And clearly, if anyone hasn't had the vaccination in that group, or in the at-risk group, or in the over 65s, then they should contact their GP surgery or attend a pharmacy. You know, general practice is, and the pharmacies between them, the vast majority are done in general practice. You know, well over 100,000 winter flu vaccinations, generally done in the bulk. In most surgeries, they have 2 or 3 flu days, and they do them. Practices are set up for mass vaccination, and they've done a really good job alongside, you know, the impacts they've had on workforce and workload. But you know, having the flu vaccination is really important, you know, and I think that that can also help protect the health service from capacity problems in the hospital. Going on to the COVID, clearly, you know, the numbers and the change in numbers that Rachel's just articulated is phenomenal, really, from, you know, 100 per 100,000 to 470 per 100,000 over the course of 2 weeks. You know, our hospital hasn't got the most ITU beds. We've increased the capacity of ITU beds, and we're increasing it up to 200% of the pre-COVID capacity. But we're receiving patients from out of the area again. So, and we do know there's a 2-week lag really between getting your COVID positive test and getting poorly to the point where you're admitted into hospital, and a further 1 to 2 weeks after that before, you know, if you were unfortunate to pass away, which is a terrible outcome, you know, for it to occur. So we are still a few weeks away from that peak, if it is the peak, and let's hope it is, and it's starting to fall, hitting our hospital capacity, and we will struggle as a system. You know, there will be difficult choices, so people have to obey the rules, and the rules aren't there as something to work up to try and sort of nudge the top of the rules level ceiling, or just, you know, or just bend them a little bit. The reality is that, you know, we should try our best to limit our social contact, limit what we're doing, follow the hands, face, space, you know, to work from home. And there is a real reason for that. People get COVID and people die. So the vaccination is coming. You know, I think that, you know, we have had as many vaccines as we've been allocated as we've been given them. There are different patchy uptake across the country, but that's purely because we're at the start of a massive programme and that someone has to go first and some other areas have to catch up. By the end of sort of February and March, that will be balanced out across the country. I think that if you are contacted by your practice or by the central teams, please get the vaccination. The latest data that was being widely publicised is that if you're in a care home, you need to vaccinate 20 people to save 1 life. If you're over 80, you have to vaccinate 200 people to save 1 life. So it's key that we vaccinate those groups first. It's key that we do the 1 vaccination to everyone rather than having an earlier second vaccination. So we're very sorry as a health service to have caused problems and concerns where people have had appointments cancelled, but the reality is for every 250,000 people that you vaccinate, you save 1,000 lives with the first vaccine. So that's a huge impact. So I need to reiterate what everyone said. Bear with us. COVID vaccination is coming. The numbers are increasing. You know, the sites are increasing. We will vaccinate as many people as we can. And the key thing is, if you're offered a vaccine, please accept it, because it will help you and help the hospitals and the wider society as well. So I think that's all I want to say, but I'm happy also to, if there's any questions that my experience or knowledge may be helpful to answer, I'm also happy to answer those as well.
Thank you, Julian. That's very helpful, and some really interesting statistics there around the number of people that you vaccinate and the number of lives you save. Superb. I haven't got anyone else who wanted to comment or has indicated in the chat box. If you do want to contribute, pop a note in the chat box. I wanted to take credit for some of the 31% of over 50-year-olds who had their flu vaccine. I'm not going to tell you how much older I am than 50, but obviously not very much. I'm assuming that there's going to be a target next year for over 50-year-olds. So the sooner we get that, the sooner I can be encouraging my colleagues who are obviously as young as I am to get their flu vaccines. And I would just say that Church Stretton Medical Practice, where I went to have my vaccine, had got the most amazingly well organised rapid system. They'd got a session of an evening, sort of as people came home from work or as people had perhaps dealt with their children and got them organised, and you literally walked in the front door and 5 minutes later, completely socially distanced, you'd had your vaccine and you were out again. So fair play. You know, GP practices are very well organised and efficient in terms of the vaccination, so I was particularly pleased to add my numbers to that. Okay, I hasn't had anyone else indicate. If I could thank Rachel and David for the paper and Julian for his contributions. I think the only thing I would say is I think we need to assume that everyone that we come into contact with is COVID positive and act accordingly, because with such ready transmission and so many asymptomatic cases, we've just got to work on the assumption that unless they're in our own household group, that anyone you come across is positive and act accordingly. Okay, so the final item is item 11, which is Chairman's update. And we were joking, as we do, when we were preparing the agenda for today, that in fact I'd not been contacted by the pharmacy service in relation to any notifications. And then just yesterday, we had a communication from Rowland's Pharmacy in relation to a number of changes of the opening hours of several of their premises. And those changes will be put and included in the minutes of the meeting, but they're across the estate from but they affect most parts of Shropshire, Wem, Broseley, Shrewsbury, etc. So if we could take those as noted, then that will be fine, and that notification comes to us as a board. Right. Okay. Yes, I've just been reminded. Thank you, Val, that the last paper, which was the COVID update and flu vaccinations update and immunisations, I didn't recommend formally that the board notes the contents of the report, so apologies for my omission. I think given the contributions from board members, I think I'll be fairly safe unless I hear to the contrary that the board formally agrees the recommendation that that we note the contents of the report and thank colleagues for their contribution. So finally then, in closing the meeting, I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank all colleagues across the system. Councillor Dean Carroll has already said this, but I think the last words from the chairman should be formally to thank all of partners and workers across the health and social care sector, including those contributions from the community and voluntary sector, businesses, schools and colleges, and the people across Shropshire who are supporting our shared effort to reduce COVID transmission in our community and playing their part in what is absolutely of no doubt to me and colleagues of the board a very difficult time for our communities, and something that only by pulling together we'll be able to improve and look forward to a time when COVID is much less restrictive in terms of our activities and opportunities. Thank you, and I will formally close the meeting.
Thanks, Lee.